To give a bit of background information, this happened to a friend of mine and she was in a high school. It was sometime in her sophomore year. We'll call her Mackenzie. Mackenzie was 15 years old and this took place sometime in 2013. So this was in her sophomore year of high school and she had been always on top of her classes and never, at least once, failed a class, skipped school, etc. The only time she skipped school is if for appointments or field trips, but you could probably understand the point, with the exception if she was sick. She used to do a lot of things at school, and she was in a lot of clubs and stuff, so she was pretty much one of the top girls in my high school. Now, however, there was this one high school moment that really chilled her to the bone. One day she walked to school as she got up early and didn't feel like taking the bus as she had a bit of a rough morning with her parents. Obviously, they had an argument, which I won't go into. When she got to the school, she ended up looking over to see that there was a boy. He seemed to be maybe 17 years old, and he looked Australian. He walked over to her and he introduced himself as Kevin. Kevin seemed to be a pretty nice boy, and he said he got transferred here and had been living there for a few years. Honestly, Mackenzie didn't even know he lived in the neighborhood or the country she's in, but she didn't even expect anybody around that height of that man. He looked to be about 6'4", and she was honestly 5'9". She honestly wasn't so sure as to who this guy really was, but she decided to buy his story and just move on with it. Everything seemed to be going well, but however, the next few days was really weird. She was one day walking to her classes when she saw that Kevin was somehow found out her class schedule and was always there after every class just to talk to her. Of course, when he tried to talk to her, she ended up going with a bunch of her group friends that were always around that corner. Now, apparently, it got really bad to the point where Mackenzie ended up realizing that she was being stalked. How that became the case, she was walking home one day when Kevin was following her, so she ended up having to take a long way home, and of course, Kevin didn't follow her home, thankfully, or so she thought. It wasn't until in the middle of the night when she woke up to hear banging. Honestly, it wasn't really banging like someone banging on a door, but it sounded like as if someone was throwing rocks at the window. At first, she thought that it could have been a storm going on, but she ended up looking over to see that Kevin was standing about a few feet from the ground of her window. It was about maybe a 6-foot drop, and she ended up going to her parents. Her parents ended up calling the cops, and the cops searched the area, but they couldn't find Kevin anywhere. Of course, this incident of this Kevin person was reported to the school, but the school said that they didn't have anybody named Kevin. In fact, there was tons of people named Kevin, but not that Kevin that Mackenzie had described it to be. However, it turns out that a disturbing truth was that this Kevin guy had been expelled from the school due to a really bad fight that went on when he was in sophomore. However, he had been in and out of that school trying to lure teens and younger women into, well, doing what he wanted to. Of course, Mackenzie had never saw Kevin again at that school, and she wondered as to if he was still locked up or not. Honestly, still today, she thinks that Kevin is probably just sick in the head or probably just doesn't even know what he's doing. But regardless, she never saw Kevin again, and she didn't even know what were Kevin's intentions were. But if she had to guess, his intentions were not good. So, to give a bit of background information, this actually happened to one of my friends named Abby. Abby was in senior year of high school, and this happened to her sometime in 2016. It was around February, and it was just sometime after Valentine's Day. Abby didn't have a boyfriend, so she had gone out of a relationship with her mentally and physically abusive boyfriend due to reasons I will not go into. But let's just say the fights got so bad that police had to be called at least a few times a week, and it got so bad that Abby ended up ending that relationship with that boyfriend. She, on the other hand, was talking to a bunch of people that she didn't even know, but she didn't talk to this one cute guy named David. David seemed to be around the same age, and he was really kind. He ended up sharing his interests, his share of it, with Abby, and Abby seemed to enjoy him. They talked back and forth almost every day, and it seemed to be really going well. However, Abby ended up starting to get realizing that this quote-unquote David person started asking him certain questions, like, can I have your address, what's your number, etc. She ended up telling him no, and she had to keep telling him no several times, but as she kept telling him no, he ended up blocking her for some reason, and of course, Abby blocked him back, not wanting to do anything with him. She ended up going to her room, and however, nothing ever became of it until 2 days later. 2 days later, she was home alone, and she was going to bed since her parents were up in the middle of the night the other night, and they had gone out to do their night shifts at their jobs. So since Abby was alone, she was going to sleep until about close to midnight. She ended up looking over to see her bedroom door was open ajar. She ended up couldn't see if there was somebody really in there. However, she looked and she could see that it was a person. Now, this person looked to be about maybe 4 feet tall, not 4 feet tall, but just over 6 foot tall, and he was really staring at her. Abby wasn't sure as to why this guy was looking at her, but he definitely gave a menacing smile. It seemed so unsettled that he couldn't even figure out what to do, and he was just stuck on what he should do, since whoever it was really staying there and didn't even move a muscle. She ended up getting up and leaving the bedroom, where she said that she would call the cops. However, she ended up locking herself in her parents' room and calling the cops when she heard someone say, "Abby, open up this fucking door." As soon as he said that, Abby ended up crying, begging the operator to please send help quickly. As if her prayers were answered, police sirens were heard in the distance, and that's when the guy let out an "oh shit" before taking off out trying to get out of the house. Followed by there was at least a gunshot, as well as some tasing and yelling and screaming. Of course, Abby came out of the room to see the man had passed out and was loaded into the police car, followed by what appears to be 2 officers who talked to Abby, calming her down and making sure she was okay. It turns out that David had somehow found out Abby where she lived through Snapchat tracking thing that will allow you to track where everyone is. This is one of the reasons why Abby doesn't use Snapchat anymore, as she gets paranoid every time she adds people on there. However, this guy, David, had been doing this to other women as well, but the most disturbing part is what is to come next. Of course, the police ended up showing her that there was some videos and even photos of other women. They were ranging from her age to 14 at the earliest age. All these girls were the people that David had been seeing, and she ended up seeing that there was a few photos of Abby taken in around the school and even at a few friends' house. The most disturbing one is there was a picture of Abby sleeping in her own bedroom. Now, she still gets paranoid and always makes sure her doors are locked in case if anything like this were to happen again. Thankfully, nothing has happened since, but she still is now worried about what would have happened to her if she had not woken up that night. A teacher who happened to used to teach in my elementary school, will call her by the name Leland. Leland was a pretty nice teacher, and of course, I know Leland is usually a girl's name, but of course his name was Leland. Leland loved teaching grade 7 and 8, and he even had a grade 8-7 class this year. However, it turned out to happen back in 2015 when he ended up being stalked. Now, he did have a wife and he did have a son who was in college and a daughter who was still in high school, junior year in high school to be exact. Leland loved teaching, and of course he really loved his students and treat them all respectfully. And if there was a problem, he was there to solve it. However, this happened sometime in mid-2015 when something really odd happened. Leland was driving home when all of a sudden he noticed that there was a certain guy in one of the stores he was stopping to pick up some things. At first he thought it might have been maybe just some weirdo looking for drugs or something. He looked homeless, but however, he just walked away. He didn't even buy anything, to which was really odd. But this was honestly weird, as he never seen anything like that before. It wasn't until maybe a few nights later where Leland was deciding that he should go outside at night, because he apparently was having a really rough time with school, and of course he was stressed out because there was a lot of work that he had to be done. However, when Leland walked out, he ended up seeing that there was a figure standing across from his house. Where his house was. He was at his house, but this man was standing about maybe across from one house to his house. Leland had considered calling the cops, but at first he thought that maybe it wasn't the same man in that store he went to. So he just ignored it. However, though, when he went back in, he ended up hearing knocks on the door. He looked outside to see that there was a man, and that same one he saw. Of course, he ended up telling him to go away and not to come back, to which the man, instead of being angry or something, he complied and left. It wasn't until the next day, though, when Leland did finding out that this guy had somehow managed to find out what school he lived at. Well, not lived, but what school he taught at. And honestly, it was getting bad to the point where Leland ended up getting a restraining order on this man. However, they didn't even know who he was, but Leland explained who he looked like and say that this guy cannot be in his property. Leland ended up installing security cameras the next day, but it's unsure as to if this man ever came back or not, to which unfortunately he's never came back. But at the same time, he did show up at least a month later. He didn't really do anything. He just walked up to Leland's mailbox, and at first Leland thought maybe he was going to steal his mail, but he just ended up putting something in there and just walked away. As soon as he was outside, Leland went to his mailbox and saw what appeared to be a note with a knife. And the note he saw was, "You're lucky that you got a restraining order. I would have murdered your family if you ever did this again." Still to this day, Leland doesn't even know what to do, but in 2016, he and his wife, along with their children, ended up moving to a different house in a different neighborhood that was more friendlier and nicer. But however, whoever this man is, please don't go after Leland again.